For nearly a decade, a killer was haunting the bayous and backroads of southern Louisiana. He left a trail of bodies that had police across 7 different parishes completely baffled. He was an incredibly prolific predator. But you know what's wild? His story is still shockingly unknown. So in this explainer, we're going to break down the case of the Bayou Strangler, a man named Ronald Dominique.
And you know what? It's almost certainly true. This is probably a serial killer you have never ever heard of. I mean, despite a staggering number of victims, Ronald Dominique just never became a household name like some of the other infamous killers. He operated completely in the shadows, preying on people who were already living on the very fringes of society.
23. Just let that number sink in. That's how many murders he confessed to. It really just underscores the scale of his 9-year reign of terror. From 1997 all the way to 2006, he lured, he assaulted, and he killed young men, and then just dumped their bodies in sugarcane fields, ditches, and remote waterways.
So you have to wonder, right? After 9 years of literally getting away with murder, what was the single, simple error that completely unraveled his entire bloody operation? Well, that is the central question we're digging into today, the one loose thread that brought his killing spree to a final crashing halt.
To find that answer, we actually have to start near the end of the story. The entire massive investigation, which, by the way, involved multiple parishes, the FBI, and state police, it all came down to one man telling his probation officer a really, really strange story.
So this man, Ricky Wallace, he tells his probation officer that he was approached by a guy in a pickup truck. This guy offers him some money for sex, but not with him, with his niece. He even shows him a photo to make it seem legit. The catch? The niece was supposedly afraid of men, so Wallace would have to be tied up first. Wallace actually goes to the guy's trailer, but he sees some gay magazines and his alarm bells just go off. He realizes something is deeply wrong here, so he just turns around and walks out. And the man, he let him go. That right there, that was the mistake.
And here's what makes this whole breakthrough just so remarkable. For years, criminal profilers have been working on this case, and they assumed they were looking for a large, strong, dominant guy, right? Someone who could physically overpower his victims. But the man Wallace identified, Ronald Dominique, was the absolute polar opposite. He was short, overweight, painfully shy, so unassuming that people literally called him a gray person. You know, someone who just fades into the background, completely invisible.
So how in the world did this gray person manage to kill for so long without anyone noticing? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning, back to 1997, to really get a handle on his methods and, even more importantly, his choice of victims.
It started with young men, like David Mitchell, just 19, found in a ditch. Then came Gary Pierre, 20, discarded near a dumpster. Then Larry Ranson. Their bodies kept turning up in these really remote areas, often with very few clues. And for years, nobody even connected the dots, because the bodies were found in so many different jurisdictions.
And the reason he got away with it for so long, well, it really comes down to who he chose to kill. Dominique targeted what one journalist killingly called invisible people. Most of his victims were young, black, and homeless. Some were involved in drugs or sex work. These were people whose disappearances, tragically, just didn't set off major alarms for a very long time. To really understand the why behind all of this, we have to look at the man himself. I mean, who was Ronald Dominique before he started killing? Honestly, his life was just a long story of failure and rejection. He was bullied constantly for being overweight and gay. He couldn't hold down even the most menial jobs. And when he finally came out and tried to join the gay community, even performing in drag, he was reportedly mocked and pushed away there too. He was just a man who felt completely powerless in every single aspect of his life. But a really traumatic incident in 1996 seems to be the trigger. He was arrested for rape, and while he was in jail waiting for trial, he was violently assaulted by another inmate. The experience was so horrifying that he made a vow he would never go back. Then, the charges against him were dropped because the victim couldn't be found. For Dominique, that was a terrifying lesson. The only way to guarantee his freedom was to make absolutely sure there were no witnesses left alive.
And that vow, it became the foundation for a chillingly simple, repetitive, and deadly method that he would use on at least 23 men. His MO was this cold, consistent 5-step process. First, the lure. For straight men, it was the fake story about his niece. For gay men or sex workers, it was a direct offer of money. Second, the restraint. He'd convinced them to be tied up, saying it was part of some game, and that was his moment of control. Once they were helpless, he would assault them and then kill them, almost always by strangulation, to fulfill that vow he made to himself. And finally, he'd just dump the body somewhere remote and drive away.
Which brings us right back to November 2006. With that one tip from Ricky Wallace, the man who walked away, investigators finally had a name and a face.
And from that moment on, the dominoes just fell one after another, so fast. Wallace identified the trailer, so investigators approached Dominique. He denied everything. But then, and you just can't make this up, he agreed to give a DNA swab. He probably thought he'd been careful enough, but he was dead wrong. The crime lab quickly matched his DNA to evidence found on 2 victims from years earlier. So on December 1, 2006, they found him at a homeless shelter and made the arrest.
So once he's in custody, this quiet, unassuming man who had terrorized Louisiana for 9 long years, he finally starts talking.
According to the investigators, it was like the floodgates just burst open. He didn't hold anything back. He confessed to everything, providing these chilling, specific details for all 23 murders that only the killer could possibly have known. He laid out the how, the when, and the where for every single victim, closing cases that had been cold for years.
Now, to avoid the death penalty, Dominique cut a deal. He pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder. That was more than enough to ensure he would get 8 consecutive life sentences. He will die in prison.
But the legal conclusion, it doesn't really answer the most troubling question of all. How could one man kill so many people for so many years across so many different communities without being caught?
The tragic takeaway from all this is simple, and it's ugly. He got away with it because he chose victims that society often looks right through. The homeless, those struggling with addiction, sex workers, people whose lives were already so precarious and whose deaths just didn't spark widespread alarm until the body count became too horrific to ignore.
So in the end, the story of Ronald Dominique isn't just about one killer's single mistake. It forces all of us to ask a really uncomfortable question about who we as a society decide to value and protect, and who becomes invisible. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? How many other killers might be operating in plain sight right now, using that exact same terrible logic?